Hello everyone, I am Prasant Nopane and welcome to my YouTube channel Best Tuition Center. Today we are going to learn about pollination and its types. This is a portion from the science, so let's get started without any delay. First of all, let's start with the definition. Pollination is basically the transfer of pollen grains from anther to its stigma. So the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma can take place within the same flower, within the different flower of the same plant, or within the different flowers of different plants. So this depends upon the conditions and the availability of the male or and the female reproductive parts. Let's look at the figure first. So in this figure we can see various parts of the flower. At the base there is the peduncle, which connects the flower with the stem. Then comes the receptacle, also known as the thalamus. Then we have got the calyx, which has got the units called sepals. Then we have got the corolla. Corolla has the units called petals. And then we have got the stamen and the pistil. So stamen is the part of the male reproductive system. Stamen and pistil are made up of various parts. So let's learn about those parts briefly. In the figure over here, you can see the stamen and the pistil. In case of stamen, there is a long slender structure which is like a tube that is present, which is known as a filament, and at the top of which is the anther. In the anther, there are a lot of pollen grains. In the same way, the pistil is made up of three layers. At the top, there is a swollen portion where there is the presence of sticky materials, so is termed as stigma. In the middle portion there is the style, and at the end there is one more swollen portion known as the ovary. The ovary contains a lot of ovules. So let's try to learn about the types of pollination now. So pollination is basically divided into two types. They are self-pollination and cross-pollination. So first of all, self-pollination. In case of self-pollination, there is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to a stigma of the same flower or the different flower but of the same plant. So the condition that we need to understand in case of self-pollination is there must be just a same plant involved. There cannot be the involvement of two or more than two individual plants in case of self-pollination. So if you consider this plant, so here we can see here is a plant and it has got three flowers. So if the transfer of pollen grains takes place within the same flower, we call it as the self-pollination. And also if the transfer of pollen grains occurs from anther to stigma between the two different flowers but of the same plant, we call it as the self-pollination. Self-pollination occurs usually in the bisexual flower, but it is also possible in the unisexual flower. For example, if you look in this diagram, suppose this flower contains only the male part and this flower contains only the female part. So during this case, if the pollen grains from here it is transported till here up to the next flower, then that is also considered as the self-pollination. So the only condition that is required is in case of self-pollination, there must be the involvement of only one individual plant. Similarly, talking about the cross-pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of different plants. So in this case, there is the requirement of the pollinators or the agents. For example, the insects, the birds, the animals, the human beings, also the wind or the water, and so on. So they can act as the pollinators. So it's common in case of unisexual flower like pumpkin, maize, and watermelon. But yes, it is also possible in the bisexual flower. So it all depends upon the availability of the pollinators. So if you look here in this diagram, we can see these are two different plants. In the first plant, you can see there are three flowers. In the second plant, there are also three flowers. Since there is the transfer of pollen grains from one plant to another plant, we call it as the cross pollination. So the main gist here to differentiate the the pollination types is by looking at the transfer of pollen grains, whether it is taking place within the same plant or between the different plants. So that is all about pollination and its types.
Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and share the video. Also subscribe the channel Best Tuition Center. Thank you.